Theme Essay, Education and Equity. Part 1, Threshold Concepts. During my studies on education and equity, I came across various threshold concepts that introduced me to new perspectives and ways of thinking. However, one of the most significant and impactful concepts that I learned about was systemic racism. In this video, I will discuss my own experience learning with systemic racism and how it has transformed the way I viewed society. This concept was critical because it tied together various themes and ideas about the systems and structures that perpetuate inequality and disadvantage certain groups of people. It helped me see how issues of equity and social justice were interconnected and how addressing one issue could have a ripple effect on others. It has inspired me to continue learning and advocating for a more just and equitable society. At the beginning of my studies, due to cultural background and limited exposure to the depth and complexity of racism led me to believe that racism was simply about judging people based on their race. However, as I progressed in my studies and took courses that focused on or related to racism, my understanding of the issue began to evolve. According to Eitzen and Zinn, 2017, racism is prejudice and discrimination against a certain ethnic group because of their race. Racism is much more than just personal biases, it is a systemic issue that is deeply embedded in our society. This realization was difficult, but it was also an important step in my growth and understanding. As I continued to learn, my perceptions and attitudes towards racism began to change. I started to recognize my own privilege and the ways in which my cultural background had shielded me from experiencing racism. I became aware of the subtle forms of racism that exist in everyday life and how they perpetuate inequality and disadvantage certain groups of people. There are examples of systemic racism in public education, such as inequitable funding between predominant white and predominant non-white schools that created a significant academic disparity among America's children, Black students being more likely to be disciplined than their white peers, organizing schools surrounding neighborhoods that can vulnerably exclude specific groups of students, especially Blacks, from attending certain schools, textbooks that ignore Black children, minorities being overrepresented in special education while underrepresented in gifted programs, school districts with a majority high poverty non-whites, students of color concentrated in underfunded and under-resourced schools, the despicable treatment of Black students who were integrated into a predominantly white school, minority students suffering racial and economic segregation on a daily basis, and structural racism that continues to disproportionately segregate students of color from opportunities to access quality systems of education. However, I also witnessed many efforts to expand educational opportunities while challenging racial discrimination, such as the Title I of the 1965 Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the No Child Left Behind Act, the President Barack Obama's Race to the Top initiative, the Bilingual Education Act, the Development, Relief, and Education for Alien Minors Act, DREAM Act, and Title IX. Overall, my experience with racism and understanding of the issue has been shaped by my cultural background and the education I received. I have come to realize that my understanding of systemic racism has undergone a significant transformation. Through my involvement in different coursework, I developed a more comprehensive and practical understanding of racism as a system of advantages. By applying this knowledge in my everyday life and future career, I believe that I can contribute to creating a more equitable and just society towards a way that I can get better as a whole. Part 2, Reflect on Challenges. I discovered that the ideas about systemic racism were frequently challenging, not because the term itself, but because people may not willing to change their minds and feelings towards Blacks. Therefore, people often dismiss this subject, and we continue live in a society where violence against Black bodies is accepted as normal in all aspects of our life. In my personal development, I was able to work through this challenge as I built up my perspective on race to advance social equity for all. This has been due to the abundance of self-reflection, discussion and analytical papers. For example, working on 2 parts of discussion papers The Problem We All Live With, alongside a reflective paper titled Understanding the Structural Nature of Racism, I was able to grasp the concept of racism and its practical implications application to real-world situations. In my experience, regular written coursework worked as an effective strategy to overcome those challenges and difficulties. It created a space for me to directly engage with and truly understand the experiences of Black people. As Baldwin reminded us in the film I Am Not Your Negro, even though not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Part 3, Looking Ahead. My greatest strength and confidence related to this theme is the intention to end systemic racism and ensure systemic equality in education, as I declared in previous analytical essays. Educational inequality in America and Who and What is Education For? My aim is to achieve educational equality by giving every child the chance to excel in their studies, and providing them with an equal education to ensure they will have an equal opportunity to achieve certain success. Past challenges on systemic racism have placed a strong effect on my perspective regarding educational equity for all children. To work on next in my development related to this theme, I would suggest to continue on using journals to critically reflect on my own thoughts, become comfortable in any discomforts, and move forward with dismantling systemic racism policies and procedures in schools. As an educator, I would promote an anti-bias, anti-racism curriculum that supports the experiences of people of color, while oppose the dominance of whiteness. I would also facilitate young minds to make sense of any disparities that they encounter, not only in schools, but also in other places, as I described in a previous infographic poster, The Color of Us. I am committed to continuing to learn and advocate for a more just and equitable society where everyone has an equal opportunity to thrive.